Welcome back. The FBI has arrested two men in New York allegedly operating a Chinese secret police station, there it is, in Manhattan's Chinatown area.
Yeah, the pair are due to face court on charges of conspiring to act as agents for China. Let's go to CNN senior justice correspondent Evan Perez in Washington, D.C. Evan, thanks so much for joining us today. Now, a Chinese secret police station, what exactly is this and what was it the men were trying to achieve?
Well, the purported reason why the Chinese were operating these stations is to provide municipal services. For instance, if you wanted to get your driver's license renewed or to get some kind of municipal service, you could go to this office and get those services fulfilled. What the FBI says, though, after watching some of these operatives over a number of years, is that it was actually acting as a front from which these operatives would go out and harass and intimidate Chinese dissidents. They would show up at protests were held by the religious group Falun Gong, for instance, which is banned in China, and would harass people who showed up at these rallies, take photographs of them, send it back to China. In some cases, they would go to dissidents and intimidate and harass them and try to force them to go back to China, where, of course, they would be dealt with by the security services back on mainland China. This was an operation that went beyond just that one station in Chinatown. They operated elsewhere in the United States and, in fact, around the world. They are now, the FBI has now passed on information to other countries that have been trying to shut down some of these illegal Chinese police stations. There's another operation here that was rolled up. Again, about 40 people were indicted as part of this operation by the FBI. 8 of them were involved in another one, which is using Zoom to try to intimidate people, dissidents again, who were speaking ill will of the Chinese government. If you mentioned Tiananmen Square, for instance, your Zoom call would get shut down. They had someone inside Zoom who was terminating accounts and, again, interfering and interrupting phone calls and Zoom calls for people who were critical of the Chinese government.
I guess the thing is, Evan, when you look at it from the outside, if they've been investigating this for some years or been aware of it, it's difficult for you not to draw the conclusion that it's really ramping up there with the ongoing struggles between now diplomatically the US and China. It's got to be seen within that prism, doesn't it?
It is seen in that prism, in part because what we're seeing is some of the visible things we're seeing with the Chinese balloon and, of course, some of the actions with Taiwan. This has been building for many, many years, and the brazenness, the word you used, the brazenness of this operation really gives you a sense that the Chinese really felt that they could get away with a lot of things that until now they had been allowed to get away with. And so the FBI was watching some of these agents and eventually finally took the action to bring these criminal charges. It's really extraordinary, though, to see the length to which they will go to shut down dissidents from criticizing the Chinese government.
It also makes you wonder how many of these may be operating in other parts of the world. Have we heard anything from Beijing about these arrests?
Well, they have not. I think it's still early over there, so we haven't heard from them so far. But we know that what they have done in the past is dismiss any of these accusations. They say that everything they do in this country, for instance, with the activities of some of their police stations, they say are completely false by the false accusations from the U.S. government.
All right. Interesting developments there, Evan. Appreciate it. Thank you. 2 New York residents have been arrested this morning, accused of operating a Chinese spy base in Manhattan. US correspondent Lawrence Marcy, where this operation was all uncovered. Lauren, good morning to you. What do we know about this spy ring?
Well, Carl, this is the very building where officials say these 2 men did China's bidding. It's an office building in Chinatown in Lower Manhattan, situated above a noodle shop on the 3rd floor. Is where those 2 New York residents are accused of opening up a Chinese police station in secret. Both of those men were arrested at their homes here in New York today. Their names are Harry Lu Jianwang and Chen Jingping, the men both accused of opening that illegal police station, along with trying to get a fugitive out to China and disregarding FBI evidence. The Justice Department saying this is a matter of national security.
We are on to you. We know what you're doing, and we will stop it from happening in the United States of America. And thanks to our investigation and arrest today with the FBI, the defendants will be held accountable, and the MPS is on notice that we will not tolerate similar threats to our national sovereignty.
The US Department of Justice says this level of espionage runs much deeper than just these two men. They've actually charged another 34 Chinese national police officers who are believed to still be in China. They say that those officers created a whole bunch of troll accounts, fake social media accounts on things like Twitter, where they posted Chinese propaganda and disinformation about things like the origin of COVID. In terms of the two men who are accused of operating the police station inside this building here, they're in a federal court here in New York this afternoon. Carl.
All right, Lauren, thank you.
Welcome back. In that major story out of New York, two residents have been arrested accused of operating a Chinese spy base in Lower Manhattan. Joining us to discuss is Queensland Senator Matt Canavan and Chris O'Keefe from 2GB. Thanks so much for your company, gents. Now, Matt, this is a discovery that's pretty unsettling when we hear about what's happening across the world with China.
Absolutely, Sarah, and it's not just something that's happening in the United States. We've seen similar reports here in Australia of quasi-police stations operating on our turf in our country, but directed by the Chinese Communist Party. I know, speaking to people in Australians in ethnic communities here too, that they have faced threats and intimidation about their conduct here in Australia, including threats and intimidation to family and relatives that remain in China. This has to be stamped out, so good on the American authorities for pursuing this. I've actually been talking to some colleagues about, do we have the right laws here to ensure that we can deter and ultimately prosecute anybody that would seek to intimidate Australians in this way.
Well, are there any inklings that this is something insidious happening here?
Well, absolutely. There were reports late last year that a number of these police stations directed by this particular Chinese government program were operating or trying to operate in Australia. Obviously, they're doing so in a somewhat clandestine way, but I hope and I think it's time for our authorities to make sure that they are prosecuting these situations in the same way the American officials are here.
Chris, obviously what happened in the US is something that the FBI would have been really investigating for some time before they actually jumped on it. Does it make you worry, though, about what else is happening?
Well, there's some reports that there are dozens of these things around the world. Now, we're kidding ourselves if we don't think it's happening in the major cities in Australia. Of course it is. If it's happening in New York, it's happening in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, all around the country. Now, this was operating on level 3 of a pretty nondescript apartment block in the middle of Manhattan. They're not easy to spot. They haven't got the lights and sirens on out the front. Like, it's not a standard police station. But what worries me about ASIO, and I know that we've seen some allegations and some arrests just recently, but largely we're told by the intelligence authorities that this stuff is pervasive, we're in unprecedented times, but no one ever gets charged with anything. So if this is happening and it's industrial, like the intelligence agencies are telling us, then go and arrest them.
Well, exactly like what Matt was saying. Why hasn't there been any follow-up, Matt? That's the question.
Well, that's what we've got to get to the bottom of now. Look, I don't have enough information to know exactly what our authorities are doing. These reports are relatively recent, and including in this one in New York, apparently only started operating in 2022, so only about a year ago. So I'm not going to jump to conclusions about our law enforcement authorities just yet, but it's certainly something we should be keeping a watch on.
2 Chinese nationals have been arrested in the US accused of operating an illegal police station in New York City to monitor and intimidate critics of the Chinese government. Let's bring in White House advisor and former Pentagon operative Tony Shaffer and Nine's political editor Charles Croucher. Morning, lads. Thank you for being with us. Tony, to you first up. Morning. These revelations are pretty disturbing. Give us a sense of why the US is so concerned about a relatively small operation in Lower Manhattan.
Yeah, I don't think it's small. I think this is literally the tip of the iceberg. The Chinese, the PRC, has been operating with impunity across the nation. They've spied on national defense programs to include weapons programs, nuclear weapons programs. They've actually had operatives get inside the FBI before. So this is but one of a series of things. And I think this is indicative of the fact that not only is New York a center of operations, Washington, D.C., and a number of other locations, plus not disclosed yet, a number of Chinese restaurants, believe it or not. The Chinese use a number of restaurants in the United States to do the same function. That investigation continues. So this is probably going to expand. You'll probably see more on this in the very near future.
I know the FBI have been investigating this operation for, around 2 years. It's hard not to see it through the prism of weather balloon diplomacy, if you know what I mean.
That's right. So remember, we actually saw in the recent release of classified documents there, and we talked about this on the show, Carl. The DoD underreported those balloons by at least 4. So indeed, I think this is directly related to that program and the fact that the Chinese not only are spying on us, they're spying on you, and they're spying on anyone who might potentially oppose them and their designs and aspirations within the Pacific Rim.
Charles, Matt Canavan says it's probably happening here. He wants to look at it more closely. It's another delicate dance for the government.
It is. I mean, there is a report from Safeguard Defenders. They are a non-governmental international organisation that looks to promote democracy. It came out late last year, and it looked at some 100 of these stations, including 2 in Australia. One of those said to be in Sydney, and another one they haven't disclosed. So to think it's not happening here would be naive. I think Matt is right, Tony is right, and indeed we have all the indications this is going on. Now, originally, these are set up to effectively monitor foreign nationals, Chinese nationals, most of them in terms of any dissidents towards China, then pressure and harass and potentially drag them back to China if it gets to that and if they believe they've spoken out or done something against the state. So it is clear it is happening here. The question is, what is the Home Affairs Minister and what is the government going to do to try and stop it?
Right, and all the evidence gathering that'll require in order to get a prosecution or to send someone home. Again, that dance between trying to be strong on this kind of activity with our main trading partner. You know, that's not easy.
Yeah, at the moment there are 2 strands almost going at the same time. There's this improvement in the main trading partner. You know, we're seeing things start to roll along. Those tariffs look like they may come off in the next few months. And building up our alliances, building up our naval fleet, preparing for what is a military relationship as well. So these 2 seem to be on different paths. At some stage, those paths are going to diverge, and what happens then becomes a big question.
Well, the US isn't dancing. It doesn't seem to be dancing much anymore. Tony, from your perspective, what does the next couple of months hold?
Well, we have to look at Taiwan. Clearly, the Chinese have done things to be very provocative in the waters in and around Taiwan. And our trade relationship, we actually have a better relationship with, more important, I should say, with Canada and Mexico than we do with China. With that said, I think the Biden administration wants to go this slow. They don't want to be overly aggressive. At the same time, as Charles said, look, we all face the same series of issues regarding Chinese aggression in the Pacific. I think our obligation in the United States is to keep all lines of communication and sea trade open. And that's something I think we would all agree upon as a common concern that we would all invest our time and military resources in potentially.
Can we also just agree that we can still go to a Chinese restaurant? Because I just love those things. I mean, we have a unanimous
General
agreement.
Zhao's chicken. Love General Zhao's chicken.
Lazy Susan diplomacy.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it, Sarah.
Thanks, Carl.